Beckett. You've been in contact with members of the Comet Research Group. I would really like to get caught up to speed on that. We could launch in like that, and you start telling me about it, and then you can tell me about Alan West, and I can talk to you about how much I respect Alan West and the work he's doing, and then we could, he's going to be at the Cosmic Summit, and then we could talk about that.
Yeah, and I think how we can kind of start it off is be like, okay, well, over the last 2 episodes, we've been looking at how Ice Age floods are not just geological events, that they could be the gateway to us rethinking our entire civilization, which is kind of where we're going today with these comet impacts, cosmic impact events, or we could say cataclysmic events. And the Comet Research Group is kind of the leading, I guess they are.
Well, they are now. I would say they're the tip of the spear when it comes to doing major impact research right now as a coherent group rather than just isolated. A lot of people are doing research on impacts, but that organization is, I think, definitely laying down the most relevant and important information in our ongoing increasing knowledge of impact.
Oh, I gotta change my name.
Primarily because what they're doing brings it home, puts it right in our lap.
Right.
Rather than being something very interesting, profoundly interesting within the history of life and in the geological history of the Earth and all of that, right? But it doesn't have that same direct bearing and immediacy onto the human level like the work of the Comet Research Group. Because what this does is it opens those windows of heaven to this whole possibility that major impact events have occurred during the time, the reign, if you will, of our species, Homo sapiens sapiens. However long we go back, maybe a couple of 100,000 years, maybe. It's sure starting to look like it. But so if that's true, what that means is that in a couple of 100,000 years, our ancestors from time to time underwent multiple events. Because even if you set a timetable of every 10 or 20,000 years, well, boom, even if you make it every 20,000, and we certainly have enough data in hand to think that the periodicity of impact events on a scale that could be major effects on civilization or on human species, humans and other species. Well, if those happen every 20,000 years, well, you can see we've got 10 of them in the time that our humans have been around. And it's 20,000 years. Now, the Younger Dryas event appears to have been the most severe, seems to have been the most recent major event like that occurred on a global scale. However, all we have to do, we can look at the ice cores, we can look at sea level cores, we can look at tree rings, we can blah, 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 blah. We can go down the list of proxies we can look at. They're all pointing to the fact that, there have been multiple times when the normal, nice, sedate, placid background change has been the order of the day, when that suddenly gets interrupted. And the whole realm of nature is just convulsed for a short period of time. And when the convulsions are over, there's a whole new regime that's settled into place.
Yeah, and the Comet Research Group has kind of been the group that's been looking at places all over the world. So we've focused a lot of our last 2 podcasts directly on the northwestern United States and Bonneville, Missoula flood regions. What other areas around the world are we going to explore for evidence of a cataclysmic event?
Oh, we've got plenty of places, and what's emerging from this is we've kind of we essentially we're connecting the dots here. We put a fairly dense cluster of dots up in the Pacific Northwest over the last 2 episodes. What I'd like to do now is put some more dots in other places around the country, let me say the continent, particularly of North America. And I think there's enough evidence accumulating there now that, we can conclude pretty confidently that North America was ground zero in the Younger Dryas. We can conclude that. I mean, I think that's pretty overwhelmingly clear. And we can talk about why. But in order to understand why, it's necessary to look at a more detailed picture of the events. So we haven't looked, for example, in the Southwest. We haven't looked in the Southeast. We haven't really looked in the Northeast. So I thought we should go some of these areas up into Canada and let the denizens of North America know that no matter where you live, the imprints, the evidence of these cosmic convulsions are all around you. They're in your backyard. You might be living right on top of them and not even know it. And if you go to work and you're in a building made out of concrete, yeah, that concrete is pretty much the byproduct of reassembling the leftovers of the last or previous several global catastrophes. Because what's what goes into the primary ingredients of concrete is what? Well, the lime and the gravel. Yeah, the cement. Okay, particularly the gravel. I've been to probably 50 gravel pits on my travels around, right? And you learn a lot from a gravel pit. But one of the things that is consistent about pretty much all of the gravel pits is they're all byproducts of enormous extreme upheavals and catastrophes. Because what's the primary byproduct of a flood? When you get sediments, floods you'll have the background flow, which is, in a normal river, normal creek. It might be vigorous, but it's not catastrophic, obviously. And if you go to any creek or river and you walk along the banks of the creek or river and you look at the channel and you look at the channel geometry, it's not going to change much from year to year to year. But then you might get a 100-year event. Let's say you get a heavy rainstorm, you get a 50 or 100-year event. Well, now you go back and you're going to notice that there have been more changes made within 2 or 3 days than probably 20 years.
And that kind of happened in Western North Carolina recently.
Yes. That would definitely be an example. That's exactly what happened. And there was more geomorphic. To find an equivalent level of geomorphic work done on that region of North Carolina, I believe we have to go back to, I'm pretty sure 1916. And in 1916, there was an anomalous extreme weather event. Yeah, check. I think that's the year. Put Asheville flood, 1916. See if I'm...
Yo, what's up, Angel? What's up, brother?
I'm pulling this out.
What's up, my man? How are you doing, buddy? Good to see you here. How are you, my friend?
Asheville, North Carolina was a devastating event caused by two.
Hope you're doing well, buddy. And and there's no more mods, my friend. I'm sorry, buddy. Don't take it personally. I improved channel security, brother.
That was of an equivalent severity to what happened.
I'm the only mod now.
There's your 100-year
Name
cycle
change,
right
yes,
there.
brother. Yeah, man. Thanks, buddy.
So, the knee-jerk reaction to something like this among certain
Hope you're good, man.
political factions is to blame this on, climate change, which has been redefined to exclude everything except for anthropogenic climate change. That's how the narrative has been contrived.
Glad you're here, brother.
Redefine the terms. If you'd have said climate change 25 years ago,
Yeah, man. Name change,
we're
brother.
talking about a whole spectrum of things, and anybody who was in a conversation or reading a paper or whatever that said climate change, they wouldn't just be thinking carbon
Thanks, man.
dioxide and
Yeah, buddy. Name
greenhouse
change, my friend.
right? They wouldn't be thinking about global
A
warming.
new era
They'd be thinking about a bunch
of life.
right? You might be thinking about ocean currents. You might be thinking about, changing. You might be thinking about volcanic eruptions, which can produce effects that can last for years.
Appreciate you here, man.
Looking at changes in solar radiation, which was always considered to be a possibility up until the 1990s. And then what happened? Well, solar science kind of got sidelined, right? Because the focus was on carbon dioxide. So the solar physicists and solar scientists are busy studying and learning a lot about the sun and realizing that the sun is a whole lot more dynamic than anybody had assumed, a decade or two or three earlier. although there were those who always were speculating and seemed to draw a direct connection between what the sun was doing up there and what was happening in the world down here below in terms of climate change. But all that got excluded, see, with the politicization of the climate science, the climate change science, it all became directed towards anthropogenic, because anthropogenic is going to give partisan.
Yeah, buddy, name change, my friend. Thanks, man.
Whether it's social control,
I want to just start focusing on just things I'm interested in life, I guess.
being proposed to combat
You know,
global warming, they all have
I had a dumb name before.
consequences, and they favor you definitely can see. Yeah, there are favored groups within that in the reallocation of money and resources towards addressing what I consider to be a completely overblown narrative, that of greenhouse global warming.
Right, and if so, you mentioned the volcano, you mentioned activity with the sun, you mentioned volcanic eruptions. They do impact the climate. So,
Oh, hell,
what
yeah,
you're
absolutely.
saying is that anthropogenic effects on the climate are what's been overblown. Not that the climate doesn't change.
Of course not. No, and I'm of course not saying that humans don't have an effect on the climate. Good Lord, we do.
It's just overblown.
It's just overblown. Right, it is. The role of carbon dioxide in the whole warming scenario is overblown.
So why do you think carbon dioxide is the thing that they're tracking? Obviously, people have economic incentive by this, but is there a reason they chose carbon dioxide levels?
Oh, yeah, it's totally not arbitrary. It's because carbon dioxide is the fundamental molecule of the whole process. There's talk about methane and talk about nitrogen, but carbon dioxide is the primary known greenhouse gas. So you're starting from a well-known premise that carbon dioxide is a quote unquote greenhouse gas. In other words, it alters, it captures longer wavelengths and re-radiates it to the Earth, right? It has this sort of insulation, or you almost think of it as a canopy, because the fast-moving radiation comes in and it's transparent. The atmosphere is transparent. Comes in, is absorbed into the solid mass of the Earth, and is re-radiated at a different wavelength. That to which it is not transparent to carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide then catches some of that and re-radiates it back to the Earth. But there's a point at which that process ceases to function in any meaningful respect. And that's pretty much where we're at. And I mean, you would have to dump 10,000 parts per million into the atmosphere. Really. And of course, like anything, if it's out of balance, it's not there's gonna be negative consequences. But carbon dioxide, at 406, 410 parts per million that it is right now, is still some of the lowest it's been in the whole Phanerozoic, or eon of visible light, which is what that means. The Phanerozoic, phanes means light, zoic means life. So you light and life together give you Phanerozoic. So we talk about the Phanerozoic, which is the great period of time, Earth history, that engulfs life. That started with the most primitive microbial life on one end and ended up with us on the other end. You and me sitting here having this conversation.
That's a strange period of time, isn't it?
Yeah. And then not to exclude, 7 or 8 billion other people.
Yeah, those two, right?
Well, yeah. So I didn't mean to ramble, Rich, but
it's interesting. I had questions for you about that. And sometimes I read the comments on this, and it seems like people don't think that you believe that the climate changes, or maybe that term is just not really fair to use. It's a
we're
gotcha
going
term.
I think what we want to do is redefine that term.
Let's do it.
And because it is completely ridiculous to say that he's a climate change denier. And it was getting called that prompted me to write a very long essay of like, what, 30 or 40 pages entitled, Who Are the Real Deniers? Well, the real deniers is not me, because, look, is there anywhere that you see me, I'll challenge anybody, find somewhere where I'm denying that the climate changes. I mean, now there is one recording of me. I'm outside. I know it's been a few years now, but I'm outside and I'm looking up at the sky, and I'm waving my fist, and I'm shouting out, "I deny that you exist. I deny that climate changes." I did.
Oh no.
So
obviously we can't take anything you say moving forward.
that's right, because no matter, it didn't matter with what force or projection, it didn't stop changing.
Yeah.
It just continued changing right on. So
You must have been wildly wrong then.
apparently so.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah. So anyways, yes, let's give that lie the rest that it deserves. I do not deny the climate changes at all. In fact, what I keep preaching about and talking about and ranting about is how much the climate changes, and that we have to get the big picture of climate change and not just focus on one variable in a very complex equation.
Right, and we looked at this every single time we've talked about impact events too. You've shown the chart of how much the climate changes. And when you look at this small little window of the last 1,000 years, it's very difficult to get the big picture of just how much the climate has changed.
Well,
Okay, so last time, just to kind of pick up where we left off from last episode and where we're going with this climate change, cosmic impact conversation. Last time we kind of left off at finishing looking at the Bonneville floods and showing what had happened in the Northwest.
Aww, thank you, sweetheart. I'm blessed.
Are we exploring?
Aw, that's so sweet of you. Thank you, babe.
yeah, I think you
Thank
are.
you,
You're going to
babe.
be surprised at some of the things that we look at. I
Aww.
want to say that if there's a takeaway from what we've done so far, it's we addressed, I think we did, in a couple of episodes to the Missoula flood, and we did one episode to the Bonneville flood, right? What the takeaway is, I want people to, it was like that focus on, remember Tammany Bar? Tammany Bar along the Snake River, it's just north of the mouth of Hell's Canyon. So the last major significant flow or story of that Bonneville flood was its passage, and undoubtedly its deepening of Hell's Canyon, which is deeper actually than the
Yes, hello.
Grand Canyon in places, right? So
Yes.
once it got out of there, you can see that it opens up considerably in the basin.
Doing well, how are you?
Lewiston and Clarkston, it actually is like in a bowl, right? And so once those floodwaters of the Bonneville flood come through and enlarged in downtown, eroded Hell's Canyon, which was undoubtedly
Sure.
but what would have happened is it would have been enlarged by 40 million cubic feet per second passing through there for maybe up to a year, perhaps. But probably closer to somewhere between 3 and 6 months. Because remember, you had this huge inland sea almost of a lake in the Bonneville Basin in Utah, where Great Salt Lake is. And we saw evidence.
No, but I'll be honest, I'm not interested in this offer. So please, yeah, can you please not... Yeah, can you just please not call me again? I know you've been trying to call me the last few weeks. Please take me off your call list.
350 feet. Well, I've seen various estimates, and it all comes down to how fast.
Awesome, thank you.
It's moving out at a slow
No, I'm okay. I appreciate it. Thank you, though.
take longer. But the range was somewhere, I think, initially maybe here, and then they realized that the flow rates were greater, which actually would have implied that it was more catastrophic than they thought. And so now, the total duration of
Okay, thank you, and don't call me again further. Thank you.
emptying was, I think, estimated between 3 and 6 months. But here's the thing we want to remember, and then we'll move on to the next part of this investigation, is that at Tammany Bar, that's where the Great Missoula Flood met the Bonneville Flood.
Right.
And sorting out that relation between those two enormous hydraulic events, some of the most stupendous, epic hydraulic events in North America. Now, Missoula, remember, was actually one order of magnitude greater than Bonneville. But the Bonneville was still a very impressive flood, and it was focused. It tended to be more focused along a narrower area than the Missoula flood. So it still did an enormous amount of very impressive geomorphic work in its passage. And in fact, that's what we're going to go in May. We're going to go, and we're going to actually, with Brad Young, we're going to start in Lake Bonneville, there by Salt Lake, and we're going to head north, and we're going to go through Red Rock Pass, which was the outburst point. We're going to see where these waters poured through this aperture in the mountains, and then we're going to follow that north. It'll cut to the west, and we'll see where it emerged out onto the Snake River Plain. Then we'll follow the evidence from Pocatello, where it discharges out onto the Snake River Plain, all the way to the southern mouth of Hell's Canyon.
Yo, Big Toad. What up, brother? What up, Big Toad?
Looking at
How are you, man?
different kinds of evidence in the landscape and so by the time we get
How are you, brother? Hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here
we're
again.
going to have a pretty good idea of across
Oh, fucking telemarketers, man. Like,
right. And it's like, you know what it's like? Here's an analogy. Like, you know, if you go spend 2 weeks in France, I know, like when I did, I came away, you know, with some, I could carry on a very rudimentary conversation. I come
The
back
fifth
away
marathon.
with some French vocabulary, right? If I see, I'm meeting some lady and she, you know, has a young one there, I would say, que la France bon.
Don't do it to the ladies, Randall. Let's start speaking French now.
But most of my French I forgot. But
Oh, wow.
here's what I'm getting. Okay,
Really? You have to pay?
somewhere people are
Have to
talking
pay to
about
play?
living, and you try to learn, yeah, you're going to soon start picking up the vocabulary. That's what this is like.
Are you, just to be clear, are you comparing yourself to a beautiful French woman?
No, I'm comparing myself to a suave, debonair French playboy.
Okay, there we are. There we are.
$500? Holy shit.
Well, hopefully people learn as much.
That's crazy. $500 fucking dollars? Really?
The suave, debonair French gentleman.
Yeah, well, you know,
Wow.
because I am okay, so I'm half Swedish, right? But the next most predominant ethnic nationality is French. Yeah, my mother's their whole line of family was the peasants, the immigrants from France.
Okay.
Yes. My mother's mother was a peasant, and a lot of the French settled in Louisiana. You might have known that.
So your background is at least partly French, Swedish?
Yeah, I would say Swedish is the big one and French is the next one. And then a mix of some Welsh. There's some Welsh in there, some Cherokee Indian, because we have two lines of the family, the Durdens and the Pettits. When they came to Georgia, both intermarried with the Cherokee, and I forget the exact. But
Thanks for being here, man. Hope you're doing well.
It's back there. It's so small, like maybe a 30-second. I don't think it's more than a 30.
Mars opposes Pluto tomorrow. It's a massive transit. That's why we're all feeling like shit.
The whole thing on that side of the family, and we had a family reunion. This was 25 years ago. And I could see, at least my mother's side of the family.
Yeah.
Father, I don't know, but one thing I don't really know any of my, you know, beyond my grandfather, who was an immigrant from Sweden. He came over from Sweden in about 1910, and he was 15 or 16 years old, and then he never went back. But I have an uncle, not an uncle, a cousin, second cousin. He was my dad's cousin, right? Okay, so my dad's cousin went back to Sweden, where my grandfather came from, and he found out that my grandfather had a, what was it, like a nephew? I think that was what it was, a nephew over in Sweden. And the nephew was the same age as my dad, and so I guess him and my dad would have been like, I don't know, second cousins, third cousins, somehow, I forget the exact geometry of it. But he said, well, I met your cousin over there. I think they were cousins. Anyways, I met your cousin over there, because he was the same age as my dad, and he had 3 sons, and the 3 sons were all the same age as me and my 2 brothers. Which was weird.
What are the odds of that?
I know. That's what I wondered. What are the odds of that? I have no idea. But he said it was pretty weird.
There's a mirror picture of the Carlson family living in Sweden.
Yeah. So somewhere I got like these second or third cousins over there. There's this family with the dad, same age as my dad. He's got 3 sons. So yeah, and they're the same age as myself and my 2 younger brothers. Anyways,
Very interesting.
It is interesting, and there's just a little side of it. And I will say that, my grandfather coming over, that was post-glacial meltdown, because, Sweden was completely covered in glaciers, in ice, during the late, it was called the Weichselian. It's the counterpart to the Wisconsin. But during the Weichselian in Europe, northwestern Europe, all of Scandinavia was buried.
When was that? How long ago?
Well, that was the same period of time, and its catastrophic destruction and melting was occurring apparently at the same time as the ice over North America. Yeah, which is interesting, and I'm not prepared to go there yet, but we need to look, because there's a lot of new information that's come out, plus a lot of information since the end of the Cold War, and of course all of that got subverted with all this stupid geopolitics that these idiots that are in charge are stirring up. But once the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union ended up, there began a lot more scientific exchange between the U.S. and Russia. And one of the outcomes of that was the geologists started getting access to a lot more of the geological studies from Russia. And that's a big chunk of the Earth's surface, right? Well, what do we start seeing? Same thing. Altai Mountains, there's a whole region up there that was subjected to flows, catastrophic flows on the same scale as the Missoula flows. We're talking 700, 800 million cubic feet per second. Yeah. So,
and that's dated around the same time.
Well, apparently, but I've recently gathered a lot of the available information, and I've archived it, and I've not yet gone through the preliminary examination of this, and the dating suggests that, it was commensurate with the melting in North America.
Wow, that would have been a bad period of time to be around.
Yes, it would have. Yes, it would have. People want to look it up. It's called the Altai Flood, A-L-T-A-I, Altai Flood. But maybe even in the next episode we'll talk about it, that we record. That'll give me a little time to put together a presentation. I've got some images and some graphics and maps and things that would, of course, be very helpful in getting the picture. But I think that the thing to understand is that, what's happening is we're discovering that this story, if you will, is definitely planetary in its scale. And it's left imprints that, once you know how to read them, to decipher them, are embedded in the whole planet in various ways. Some places subtle, some places extreme. But we're at a position now where we can actually begin to read this stuff, because 50 years ago we didn't have LiDAR, we didn't have ground penetrating radar, we didn't have digital elevation maps and models like we have now. We didn't have the data of tree ring climate changes. We didn't have the ice cores like we have now that have been analyzed. We didn't have the seafloor cores. It goes on and on.
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, Randall, because you're talking about the technology that we have recently. Did you see what has kind of happened? I would be very surprised if you haven't seen the scans, the new scanning technology that they used for the pyramids. I'm sure people want to hear what your perspective is on the supposed underground structures and tunnels that.
Well, I'm going to record something next week where I talk about it more in depth, but for now, I don't want to get too sidelined from what I actually have prepared. But good question. Basically, what we can show in terms of global changes and mega floods is we can show that pretty much every place on Earth has at one time or another been subject to extreme pluvial events, and that includes North Africa, includes Egypt, and that became apparent back in the 1980s with the shuttle radar that first was able to peer through the sand sheet there in the Sahara Desert. And what they were able to see under the sand was a whole network of erosional features that had been carved by running water. So it's become very apparent since the late 1980s. I think this first shuttle overflight that imaged this was, I think it was 1988. I could actually pull it up on break, except I am going to do a more
comprehensive.
More comprehensive. Okay, then we also have the Nile Valley. The Nile Canyon, we'll refer to it. The valley, when you think of the Nile, you talk about the Nile Valley, you're looking at this nice, fairly level layer of alluvium that all the agriculture of Egypt is being undertaken in the Nile Valley on these nice flood terraces, and the whole history of Egypt and why it was able to emerge from the barbarian backdrop in that particular area was because of the fertility of the Nile Valley and the fresh soil, topsoil that was deposited during these Nile River floods that came every year, almost like clockwork, but maybe with some important disruptions to that process, as a matter of fact. But for the most part, coming like clockwork. And the clock that was used to time it, coincidentally, was this relationship, this correspondence between what's happening here below on the planetary surface with the annual flooding of the Nile, because that was a result of the monsoon rains over the southern highlands and the headwaters of both the Blue and the White Nile. So those rains would come in, and then you'd have that flow north. Now you're picturing the Nile, it's flowing north. And
Good to put that conspiracy to rest.
Put that conspiracy to rest. That the direction of the Nile River was mysteriously reversed last night.
Hey, do you guys know that if you go and look at what AI says, it says the Nile River flows from from north to south.
Somebody needs to retrain that AI.
Somebody needs to retrain that. Now it's going to hear this, and somebody's going to look, and it's going to be fixed by the time.
South to north. It flows into the Mediterranean. It starts in the Ethiopian highlands, flows north. Now, here's the thing I wanted to get at. Back to the question you asked. So you got this nice verdant valley, lush. The river comes through. Even during the flood, it's somewhat vigorous, but it's still, a pleasant, well-domiciled river. The thing of it is that if you're standing there next to the actual river, you're standing on top of a column of alluvium that includes both material washed out from the highlands, but also marine material that's been backwashed up from the Mediterranean, right? If you were to now scoop out the infill, the sedimentary infill, you'd be looking at a canyon 6,000, 7,000, in some places even 8,000 feet deep. It's a gigantic deep gash in the earth. But it has also served as a repository for the infill of all of this material that has been washed into it. And the material that's been washed into it is material that's been carried, stripped from the uplands, stripped from the ground above, carried in floodwaters. That floodwater has become channelized, and most likely repeated catastrophic floods, down that slot, right? That discharges into the eastern Mediterranean. Well, this process began when, for whatever reason and however we explain it, the waters of the Mediterranean dried up. The whole Mediterranean disappeared, I think between 5 and 7 million years ago. And at some point, the Atlantic Ocean, which was barricaded, and I haven't studied the most recent research on this. The Xanthian flood was when the dam, if you will, at the Straits of Gibraltar burst, and the waters of the Atlantic poured in and filled the Mediterranean basin. But when it was dry, if you were down on that floor, which I think was like a mile lower than the ocean surface now, and you were standing where the Nile Delta is, right? And you were looking south, you would have been looking at basically a canyon that was as deep as the Grand Canyon in front of you. And that is what's now filled with sediment, and that's the Nile Valley. And that sediment splays out from the Nile Valley and forms the delta. And then the delta transitions to below sea level, right? But that whole delta is now being used for agriculture and so on, and was inhabited in Neolithic times. But see, Pete, so here's the point. There's been enough erosion of that limestone, and it's mostly limestone. The Giza Plateau is mostly limestone, Eocene limestone, thick limestone. The point is that we have growing evidence that there have been enormous flows of water over the surface of what is now the Sahara Desert, including Libya and Western Egypt. Right? Some of that water undoubtedly discharged through the Nile. Some of it probably discharged straight north into the Mediterranean basin by various routes, right? And we have evidence of enormous amounts of erosion. Now, that channel that I just described and talked about, I mean, that's just within a few hundred yards of the edge of the plateau there where the pyramids are. So here's what I'm getting at, is that it would be perfectly believable that there could be cavities, caves, some of them pretty large, honeycombed through the limestone bedrock under the pyramids. Now, at this point, I would not be willing to go any further than that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's worth it to show the actual scan, because most people who are talking about this have just seen like this 3D artistic depiction of what this scan could be. And this is Johanna James' post.
Yeah.
Shout out to Johanna.
It isn't. I mean, I look at that and I go, okay, what actually is this showing? And I'm not prepared to go from the image on the left to the image on the right.
No, it's a jump.
It's a huge jump. Now there is examples of very large shaft-like caves. Let's see, there's one right there along the coast of Libya to the. Let's see, I can tell you what it is here. Let's see here.
So further investigation is needed, and you're going to be making a more comprehensive video about this for people.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk in more detail about the Xanthian event and the and the erosion and what might that have to, how that might be related to the controversy about the age of the Sphinx. Because clearly, the controversy with the Sphinx was, well, does the Sphinx have evidence of major water erosion? Well, if it does, then you have to go, okay, when was there enough water available to erode to create that level of erosion. And when I went there, what I saw was that they've been doing so many reconstruction campaigns, restoration campaigns on the Sphinx, that it's hard to determine what was the original. If they had not done any restoration campaigns in the recent centuries, or even in older times, what would we be seeing? Because you look at it, and a lot of what you're seeing is restored masonry. So I think perhaps kind of misleading, but if you look at the walls of the ditch around it, nobody's tried to restore that. And to me, that's now almost more valuable than the Sphinx itself. Because clearly, it has, in every way, it's consistent with water erosion. And that's my opinion on that. And I know there are others who have other opinions, such as, groundwater sapping and things like that. But I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it was a surface flow, that it was an overwash, that it was a sheet wash moving over the thing. It was probably coming from the west, because that goes up in elevation, and that would be consistent with the fact that there are channels incised into the bedrock under the sand sheet. That was the whole importance and value of the shuttle overflights, is because for the first time we were able to peer beneath the sand and see that the bedrock under the sand is all completely channeled, paleo-channeled, you would call it, with evidence of...
Oh, Swirl, what's up, brother? What's up, Swirl? How are you, man? How are you, my buddy?
What is now
How are you, brother?
Which I think would have to be attributable to pluvial events, and that's what they're calling it, right? Pluvial period, which means rainfall. Question is to now refine that. You could say, okay, there's a broad span of 3,000 years, 5,000 years where rainfall was more plentiful than now. And that's absolutely the case, because we can see the evidence of when the Sahara was basically green and occupied and had lakes. So obviously that was a very different climatic regime. So I find it really rather ironic that one could be talking about such things on that scale, climate changing on that scale, and yet have someone accuse you of being a climate change.
Yo, Sayonara, what's up, man? What's up, guys? The family. The family. What's up, brothers? What's up, everyone?
I wish I could remember the name of that cave, because I want to put it. It's a good example.
What's up, my friends?
It's in Libya, right along the north coast. It's actually one of the deepest caves in the world, or biggest caves in the world. That might be the
What's up,
one.
brothers? Legends?
Well, there are caves.
Chads?
That actually exist. So I guess the point I'm getting at here is that, all the pieces fit for, enough erosion taking place over this terrain that there could be large cavities and caves, but the question is that what this synthetic aperture radar is showing, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
It sure looks, well, pull that back and look.
Left phone in the car. Oh, no worries.
The central one there looks like it has the most coherent organization to it.
Yeah.
That one right there. Well, I want to see more evidence. I want to see some peer review. I want to see some independent corroboration. I just want to see more studies, because I look at that and I go, what the hell is that? Is it natural?
That's a great question, isn't it? That's the question we should be asking.
Yeah. Now, here's if it wasn't entire, maybe it's something that could have been natural and then got modified, because we see many examples of it. You start out with a cave, you enlarge it, you remove, you re-sculpt it into a... Yeah, so it could very well be natural cavities that were then modified. But then you have to get access to that. And certainly caves, you could be looking at going down thousands of feet. So if you had natural caves, now could it be that there are connections, there are entrances to those caves, but they're within or under the pyramids? I mean, now that's not so,
Implausible.
no, it's not implausible. And what, Andrew Collins, he wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet, but now I want to check. So he might have been kind of ahead of the game on this. Yeah, Andrew B. Collins. There we go.
He's with Shock and Armando.
So he was proposing that there were caves under the Giza Plateau. But that's something I've thought for a long time. I mean, when I first learned about reading about the article, it was on the Selima sand. Pull up Selima sand sheet. Mapping. Yeah, paleohydrography. Look at that, paleohydrography in deserts. Space-borne imaging radar. That's your SRI. Paleo drainage. There we go. In the Selima sand sheet were determined using high-resolution, multi-wavelength, multipolarization, space-borne imaging radar data, and global land, one kin base elevation, project digital elevation. Okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. The combined use of these two data sets shows that both large flood features and later superimposed drainage channels of variable morphology all drain northeast and east-northeast from northwest Sudan toward the Karga Depression in southern Egypt. Okay. This is actually not the particular study I was referring to, but it's the same thing. It's just showing, again, that hidden beneath the surface is this whole landscape showing a completely different. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, these directions are opposite to those of the trans-African drainage system model, in which the large flood features are considered to flow southwest across northeastern Africa into the Chad Basin. Internal drain operating on green.
Okay, so when I hear that they're opposite in direction of that, it makes me think that there is some type of, and this could just be my ignorance, but it makes me think that there's some type of massive force of water going the opposite direction than what we see today.
Yeah, you could look at it that way. In fact, my first impression would be is once we're understanding the magnitude and how dynamic these paleohydraulic events are, we have to begin to realize, oh my God, we're looking at sometimes where you can have maybe a cataclysmic flow in one direction, followed by a cataclysmic flow in a completely different direction. But how do you explain it? Well, I mean, in terms of tsunami deposits, it's obvious to explain because you have the run up on the land, and then you have the backwash into the ocean. So you've got up and reverse, right? So anywhere where you would have something like, say, a basin that filled with water and then empties, you're going to get a bidirectional flow. And I don't know, I haven't studied enough on Africa, other than to know that Africa has an interesting sort of subsurface geomorphology or topography, in that it's a series of basins surrounded by highland areas. So you could have a lot of rain filling one basin, and it could overflow into another one. And perhaps that could reverse. I wasn't intending to talk about that. I will show that in the presentation I'm going to do next week. I'll show that because the takeaway from this, again, relative to the question, is that we know that there have been large-scale pluvial events and fluvial. Fluvial meaning flowing water, pluvial meaning rainfall. And of course, obviously, they're related.
Swirl, what's up, man? Hope you're doing well, buddy.
You can also have a heavy fluvial consequence of it. Right? So the argument could be made that particularly limestone bedrock terrains could be honeycombed with caves. Now, to what extent were those caves accessed by humans? That's an open question, and I don't think anybody, to my knowledge, has really proposed anything beyond the typical caveman scenario. Nobody's assuming that maybe people are going into caves hundreds of yards underground, and maybe there are large areas that could have been inhabited. But that seems entirely feasible. And so, again, I don't know what we're looking at there. That one central column in particular looks like two organisms to be natural. But I don't know. We're gonna wait and see.
Yeah, we will. Well, thanks for diving into that, Tim. I was very curious what your perspective was thus far. So where are we picking up? Where are we picking up in North America?
Okay, so what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna open Google Maps to start, and we're gonna go up to British Columbia.
Have you ever been to British Columbia?
Oh yeah, multiple times to research what I'm about to show you.
When was the last time you went?
Oh God. 10, 12 years ago, I guess. Yeah, 10, 12 years ago, somewhere I'm going to guess, because I think the last time I was there, I visited the studio of the
Okay, these days same routine calling. Oh man,
Graham Dunlap.
I hope that goes well, my friend.
We did a podcast together, and Bradley Young was
Is there a reason for that? I guess
all gathered
your
around
stomach issues again or whatever.
which I think they've upgraded since then.
Sorry, brother.
But that was the last time, so I'm guessing
You gotta see if the medication is doing its thing. Yeah.
maybe. I think that was my third time.
Wow, man. That's brave of you. Proud of you, man.
Plug for the Bonneville flood. You said Bonneville flood tour that you're doing. You started talking about it earlier, but that's in May 11th.
May 11th, yeah. We're going to be traveling the route, following the route of Great Bonneville Flood,
Right.
and seeing what happens to landscapes when 40 million cubic feet per second flows over those landscapes for a period of 3 or 4 or 5 months, and what it does in the
Oh wow.
And so it's going to be not just looking at
Wow, man.
landscapes, but it's also going to be
Hopefully you can get off the
learning
meds.
to read this script, if you want to call it that.
I hear ya.
This epic tale of which the Bonneville flood is a part.
I hear you, my
Be
man.
able to speak a little bit of flood French.
There we go. Yes. There we go. I like.
Makes me tired, yeah.
Awesome. Well, there's a couple
hear you,
of
brother.
spots left, I presume.
I think the last time.
I'm sorry, man. I don't know what that's like.
I don't think it's sold out. I think there's 3 or 4 spots left. If I had to guess.
So 3 or 4 spots left. If you guys want to see what we're talking about, get them.
Oh yeah, check it out. We're gonna have a.
That's good you're on top of it.
.com,
Taking care of it.
Bonneville flood May. I think we've got some more information on it. But if you're interested at all in understanding the big picture of Earth change, and
Let me get this car.
this is a very good
and own
way
it.
to introduce yourself
Oh, nice, man. Nice, buddy.
into that realm of knowledge.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. For work.
Reports, feedbacks that I get from
Dang,
people who
man.
attended these tours is that they really
Yeah, buddy. Follow your heart, my friend.
yeah, there we go.
Follow your heart.
Join Randall Carlson Brand
Lead with your heart.
for an unforgettable 6-day adventure as we trace the path of the ancient
Yes.
Bonneville flood through Utah and Idaho. This immersive geological tour offers a rare opportunity to witness the remnants of one of North America's most significant cataclysmic events, the massive flood that reshaped the landscape as Lake Bonneville burst its natural dam thousands of years ago. Guided by Randall's deep knowledge of Earth's catastrophic history, this trip will take you to iconic locations showcasing the incredible forces that carved out the landscape. Each day will feature hikes, geological discussions, and moments of awe as we delve into the story behind the terrain. I couldn't have said it better myself. Did I say that? I don't know who wrote that. I don't think I did, but that was really well. Who wrote that? Was that Darren? That's really what was it, Brad?
Who knows?
It was well written.
It was well written. It was very. We're gonna use that audio for an ad. We didn't even have to script it. It was already done for us.
Hot dog, hallelujah. Okay, let me get my map over on this monitor. Canada indicates detachment of the Laurentide ice sheet from the Rocky Mountains at approximately 15,000 years ago. I would suggest that it's probably closer to 14,006, which would make it more consistent with Meltwater Pulse 1A, but it's certainly within that window. Because Meltwater Pulse 1, wait there, I saw 14.9, there it is, let's see. Based on a group of 12 samples well clustered in time, we date the detachment of the western Laurentide ice sheet margin from the Rocky Mountains to approximately 14.9 plus or minus 0.9 thousand years ago. This is 1,000 years later than previously assumed. Yes, and I think that could still be 1,000 years. Maybe not, maybe 300, 400 years. Because I said 14.6 is, I think, the latest date for Meltwater Pulse 1A. And my first impression would be that this is probably going to be a regional manifestation of whatever triggered that melting event at 14.6. So let's see, a later separation of the western Laurentide ice sheet margin from the mountain front implies higher ice margin retreat rates in order to meet the younger driest ice margin position. Well, we knew that. Yes, it implies higher ice margin retreat rates. This is the whole direction that this research is moving, is that these things are happening a lot faster than people were imagining a few decades ago. And we're having to rethink some of the temporal models for these events. And I think what we're going to do, like here, so I'm saying 14.6, this is 14.9. So you're only, 300 years off?
Just about.
And I want to read this study. Okay, so this introduces. Let's go. Do you have images? Let's see. Go to images.
What do we want to look at here?
Let's see here. Okay, I've got. Okay. That second from the left. That shows the map. You can get the picture. Okay, so you see right there the origin. You see this right here. The boundary between British Columbia and Alberta forms the continental divide of the western North American continent. Right? That's the divide right there. So you can see that this thing. The erratic train originates right there on the Continental Divide, and then it follows this route down, goes by Calgary right in here, loops to the east, and then finally comes to an end in Montana. So what is that? What is
the erratic train?
Okay. Well, okay, scroll down and you will see second from the left. You're hovering on right there. You open that. Okay, so as you would guess from a train, it's something on the order of 500 miles from its source there on the British Columbia-Alberta border where we saw to its final example there in Montana. And there's hundreds of them, but these are examples here. And they're all of the same type of rock. It's a type of metaquartzite. It's a metamorphic rock, similar to granite in a way. Metaquartzite. So the question then is that what are we looking at here? We're looking at a string of these boulders. You can see. Look at the top row, third from the left. You can see that's a pretty big rock. Right? You see the guy standing next to it. You go to the next one, it's D. Same thing there. That's a pretty good sized rock. And you can trace these things in this line that we just saw on the map over 500 miles. So if you were, this is to me, it's very much like forensic geology. Okay, we're looking at this and we're trying to go, okay, this rock didn't move itself. So by what exact mechanism of transport can we attribute to the geographic disposition of these rocks? How do we do that?
I mean, we chalk it up to giants moving rocks.
Well, there's that. But, well, in a way, there's a certain element of truth to that. So this is the kind of thing that, you know, I mean, who knows about this? Who thinks about it? Who has any concept, really, of what the significance of this would be? Well, not very many people, I can tell you that. And you're about to become one of them. If you feel intrepid enough.
It is of interest to me to become one of them.
So this is the foothills erratic stream. Okay, the foothills are the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And you have this region called the Rocky Mountain Front. And anybody who's been to Denver and looks to the west sees the Rocky Mountain Front right there, laid out. Right, well, it goes all the way up into Canada. And so you've got the, what I'll do here is I am going to share screen, and we're going to take a look here. Okay, so we go to Calgary. Right, so all of this is part of the Rocky Mountain Front. So check this out. All of this is the Rocky Mountain Front. And then you go east of the Rocky Mountain Front. Now you're out onto the Great Prairie, the Mid-Continental Prairie. And, you know, it's always so fascinating.
Sailor Curse, what's up, brother?
Especially if you're coming from the east.
You know, it's just like,
Across the prairie. And the Rocky Mountain Front just looms up in front.
I can't be like a joke forever, you know? I can't be like the sarcasm. Like, Gyges, he's the archetypal hedonist, right? But like, I'm gonna be like 40 in like a fucking couple months. I like need to grow up, man. I need to grow up and like following my dream, like as a man. Like, what do I want to accomplish on this earth as a man? You know what I mean? Not like stop being a child, but grow up in terms of like, I came to this earth for a reason. Gotta have fun. Yeah, you're right. As long as growing up doesn't mean abandoning. No, yeah, that's true, man. Well fucking said. That's a quote. That's a quote right there. Yeah, but I think I'm becoming like more myself, you know. But let's see. Let's see what happens.
I guess that's it. It done debouches here from the river, from the mountains. No, it's a French debouche.
Because I'm changing myself, yeah, buddy. Mars squaring Pluto, taking action to get rid of like the decrepit, take out the trash. This weekend, tomorrow, specifically tomorrow. Tomorrow's the big day. That's also a quote right there. These are like solid quotes, man.
Oh, well, that's probably the American.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does it say? What's the definition?
In hydrology, a debouche, or debouche with an E.
Okay.
Runoff from a small confined space discharges into a large.
And Angel's, where's Angel's quote? We're adding everybody's quote today.
Okay.
We're
So I'm not as dumb as I look.
And my babe, my girlfriend.
Yes. The Athabasca River debouche. Well, what's the plural of debouche? Debouches? It debouches. Well, all right.
Hey, we didn't even have to question it. We just could have kept rolling, right?
We could have. Okay. So I'm not as dumb as I think I am sometimes. Okay, so, but that's important. Okay, all kidding aside, that's important. So let's back out here. Now, why do I have Mount Edith Cavell flagged? Well, I actually should also flag Mount Robson, which is right here. Look at this. There we go.
Man, I'm back for maybe like 2 months.
Though what's really the row is that at the end of the last ice age, at the LGM, remember the LGM, late glacial maximum? The only thing of these mountains that you saw was just like the uppermost peak. That's all you saw. Because oh geez, let's see, it's got to be, I think, what, 3,000 feet above the valley floor. I can tell you right here because, well, let's see, I would want to open Google Earth.
It says 3,000
per minute.
meters.
Yeah, honestly, maybe, man.
That's 12,000.
That's also a quote. No, man, I was in China, brother. I taught at Zhengzhou University, my man.
That is Mount Robeson.
I'm really blessed. I was there for. Did you not know? Did you not know I was in China? I went to China for like a month, man. I'm sorry, dude. I guess I even made like a YouTube video about it. That's all good. Oh, you're just joking. No, you didn't. Oh, wow. Yeah, man, I got videos of Zhengzhou. Yo, you should join my Discord, man. I guess I posted everything in Discord months ago. Oh, thanks, Toad. We're gonna do another. It's gonna happen again.
With a K or a C?
I thought it was the past few weeks. I was in Miami. No, I would have messaged you, man. I would have messaged you. I would have messaged Christian. Man, I want to go back to Miami, man. How's the podcast? Is the podcast loud? I know this mic's a lot louder than the other one.
Lonely Mountain.
You are hearing me. I'm gonna turn down Randall a little bit. So, did you see me stream? Yeah, I didn't stream. Actually, I did. I streamed once. It was an epic stream in China. Toad was there. Sailor Curse was there at like 4 a.m. It was epic. We got raided by Ninja Lifestyle.
At the end of the last ice. Yeah. Wow, it's right.
Yeah, but dude, I went. I taught 1 month at Zhengzhou University of Aeronautics. I have a walkthrough video. I was gonna upload it. I'm gonna upload it in a while though. I mean, I guess I could play some of the video, maybe. I better not put this on here. Oh, there it is. It's fine. Nothing hidden about it.
Both from glacial erosion and water erosion.
Well, you just answered a lot of conspiratorial questions here. I don't even think you realize what you just did to the internet.
Oh, sorry guys, but I mean, we're looking. This is normal to the plane of the vector again. Aren't we looking perpendicular?
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah.
This This is a satellite image.
Yeah, so that's a two-dimensional, essentially a planar surface there, isn't it? But I see, so there's, yeah, I got it. So, but that actually is very normal glacial erosion. That's not atypical.
Why is that?
Well, it's because the way, yeah, I mean, okay, so when we get, I can show you, like, examples of, I have photographs that I've taken on trips. We see exactly that same kind of erosion. On varying scales, but you got to picture, if you've got a glacier moving through, looks like up there just above the red flag, right in there. Okay, that would be like a base of the thing. Well, that's a valley right there. Right. That valley is occupied by a moving glacier. That moving glacier is gouging and stripping the bedrock as it's plowing its way through. Now, what you end up with is sort of natural. You can see it in water erosion too. What you end up with is a triangular planar surface. I'll pull up some examples and show you here in a minute if you want me to. Okay, so anyway, back to this. You got Mount Robeson and you've got Mount Edith Cavell. You've got the Athabasca River debouching from the Rocky Mountain front, turning south at Hinton, and then following more or less parallel. Okay. So here's Mount Robson. Mount Edith Cavell is right down. Right here. Now notice that you've got the river flowing here. This is the Yellowhead Highway. Oh wow, Yellowhead Lake. I forgot that. That's right, Yellowhead Pass. Well, this is a trip, let me tell you, going through Yellowhead Pass. So this is what Bradley and I did. We followed the route of the erratic strike, which was a very interesting thing to do. So we started at Mount Robson and we followed the river on out. And then we came out here and let's see, what did we do? Did we come all the way out here and come south, or was there a road? I need to go back and backtrack because I photographed everything as we went. But anyway, so we followed the route, the erratic strike. We stopped in Calgary, and this is where we met Graham Dunlop and Darren Grimes, because they were living in Calgary. And the reason we were there was we were on our way to this right here, Okotoks, which I believe, if I remember right, was in the Blackfoot language and meant big rock. And Okotoks was the biggest of the erratic strike.
Wow.
So did you find something?
Yep, I got it.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and let's see what you got. There it is. In fact, no, that was. Okay, yeah, a bunch of pictures of it.
Look at that.
Yeah. Let's see. Go back. I wonder if any of my photos are up there anywhere. Let's see.
Oh, there's a photo.
Oh yeah, that's the one I took. That was the first time I was there.
This is one rock.
Yes.
Oh, okay. How big is the rock?
Well, let's see. What we'll do is we'll go that way. You can see a person standing
Right here,
Yeah, 18,000 tons. So you see how it's sitting out there in the prairie? Okay. So how far is it from, say, from Mount Robson to Calgary? Mount Robson to Calgary. How far is that? Oh, look at that great area.
All right, I'll show you guys a little bit of Zhengzhou University.
495 kilometers.
So call
But-
it 300. So
Let me show you.
18,000-ton rock. Boulder, metaphor site, has been transported 300 miles from its source. Okay, so now when you look at back to
I guess I might as well just keep it full screen, honestly. Oh, but then someone can literally just take the video. Well, I guess I'm gonna upload it to my channel, so it is what it is. Like, this is Zhengzhou University, but what I want to show is I want to show you the jets, man. The jets, brother. Source toolbar. Dude, these jets. It's an aeronautics universities. Check out these fucking jets, man. I mean, they're from the 60s, right? They're not like new jets, sorry. These are from the 60s, but still. Like, that's a MiG. That's a Chinese version of the MiG. This one's called the Shanyang. It's a side air intake. You're still here? Thanks, brothers. What month was this in? Bro, this was March to April, my man. Yeah, it's a lot less clean. Video source is really loud. It's a lot less clean. But I think it's just like a lot of it is factory. But a lot of it I think is just like dust. I think it's just such an old, dusty. Because like, look at the ground. The ground, it's not like organic soil. It's like a dust. I think it's just so old and eroded that there's just like dust flying around in the air. Because it's a different type. It's not like it's so old, man, and eroded. Like, it's crazy. And a lot of China was underwater like millions of years ago. Aw, thanks, Maeve. Aw, man, I want to give you a VIP, but I ran out of VIP slots. Thanks, sweetie. That would drive me crazy, yeah. Yeah, you can't leave your window open. Or else it'll just get dusty. This happened in Guangrao, and I think it happened in Zhengzhou too, but what's it called? I was on like the 26th floor, so I didn't open my window. Alright, I don't want to give away too much of this video. I hope you guys and girls watch it when I upload it. But yeah, like, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool jet. And that's like the main university. The cherries were in bloom. It's nice. That's the main building. But I taught in like one of these buildings. I taught in a couple of buildings. And you can only get on campus with a key card, or if you're a student with ID. So I think this is the Chinese version of the MiG. MiG 21? Something like that. How many planes? There was 3 jets and 1 small fighter from, looked like World War II. Let me show you that one. That one's pretty crazy, actually. It's in a different video, though. Oh, and then there's this one. It has the name. I think it's in Chinese. '79 to '96, '99. This is the Mega 21 copy, this one. This is the one. Look how sick that is, man. That's so cool. And darling. That's crazy. This is like exclusive content. You can't even like get into this place. Pretty crazy. How do I edit the video source? Oh my gosh. Video source properties. Properties. Let me show you the other plane. It's pretty crazy. So I thought it was a Spitfire, right? Thought it was a World War II British and German. I think even the Germans had Spitfires. This might be a Spitfire, but I don't think it is. It looks like smaller. It might be. I don't think it is though. It looks weird. It looks like a weird. It's like a Chinese version. I guess it might be one. Might be a Spitfire. I'm gonna look right now. See what it is. What Spitfire looks like. I think I saw the sign here. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not. It's like a Chinese version of it. It's crazy. 79. So 62 to 79. Okay. It's like Korean War. Alright, reading the comments. Great camera, thanks, brother. Top secret, yeah, really. I mean, it was. I mean, it totally was. In 60, 70, right? These planes, they may have never even left China, ever. These planes might have never left China. It's pretty crazy, if you think about it. And one more. This is right at the entrance. Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, I was really lucky. I was really blessed. I was really blessed to have that opportunity to be invited. Yeah, the camera is a Samsung S20 FE with a gimbal. I'm using a gimbal. A camera stabilizing gimbal. The gimbal I'm using is a DJI Ohm 5. Highly recommended. The Ohm 5. That's the building I taught in right there, that one. That first one. Oh, that's it. That's it. That's all. That's all. We got more videos, but we're not gonna spoil those. All right, we got one video. I'm probably gonna upload it to YouTube too, but we got one to go. Properties. Maybe two. Patience, please. Thank you. What am I doing here? Where is it? Fucking hell, man. Sorry, everyone. One sec. There it is. That's a Shaolin temple. Alright. We'll do one more video. One more of the Kung Fu. The Wushu. See that one? This one, the landing's better, but this one, the front kick's better. It's like near perfect front kick there. I think they're both good though. I think I'm gonna upload both because they work well in a tandem. You just see that front kick. See that horse stance is not good, but the horse stance here is really good. Alright. Scare the shit out of the dog. Thanks, brother. Cool. That's awesome. Thanks, guys. Aw, thank you. And my sweetheart made comments before. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. All of them watching. The Great White Man. People were hungry for martial arts. I went. Yeah, man, people were really hungry. Dude, I went to the. I'll show you. I gotta show you this video now. I'll do one more video. No source properties. I got you. Where did? Oh, I deleted it. Add. No, I didn't delete video. The video source. It is of. Oh, I don't have it on here, do I? No, I don't. It's on the hard drive. I don't have it here. Sorry. It's of. So the Shaolin Temple has like a martial arts museum and school. And it's amazing. It's like in the fucking valley. Because the Shaolin Temple's like in a valley. Between like two like pretty massive mountains. Not snow-top mountains, but like. I think that they might even be flint deposits. Because it was all underwater at one point, I think. Well, that part meets a region of mountains, but Maybe more time, just get perfect the front kick and landing in one go. Well, yeah, that dog one was my last take because my legs were giving out. I did maybe like 15 to 20 takes. Sharing these beautiful memories, teaching about the China culture. Aw, sweetheart. Oh, babe. Aw, I love it. Thank you. You're so sweet. I love it. I love you. You're amazing. Yeah, my legs were giving out though. So that was my last attempt. That's why the front kick wasn't perfect on that one. Thank you.
Ready for it.
So there we go.
Aw, I gotta reconnect.
So this,
Come on.
Let's see. You can see Brad Young right here in the foreground. So it gives you a sense of the scale of this thing. It's enormous. 18,000 pounds, and we just determined that it's been transported about 300 miles from its source, from its bedrock source.
So those two, just to be clear, Mount Robson and Mount Edith Caville, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes.
Two places where this type of rock is found.
Those are the two mountains that look like basically reefs. I think most of the opinion has been that it was sourced from Mount Edith Caville.
Okay, so a little bit closer than Mount Robson.
Little bit. But you still got a problem. Both of those mountains, as it turns out, are on the west side of the continental divide. This is on the east side. So what you have to do now is you have to come up with a means of first of all, you have to quarry these rocks. Now this is part of this 500-mile foothill strategy. This just so happens to be the biggest one. The ones we pulled up, you saw those others, it's the same from the same place. Right? Now, I don't know what the total weight of all of them is because there's a lot of smaller stuff strewn in that long 500-mile path. Right. I don't know the total. I've never. Somebody may calculate the total volume of the. But I don't know what it is. But in any case, you've got this train of this stuff going. It's strewn about 500 miles there from where the Athabasca River debouches at the mountain front by Hinton all the way down into Montana. So and the largest one, many of them weigh many tons. This happens to be the largest, which weighs 18,000 tons. So let's focus on this because we can come up with an explanation for this. Let's see here.
Are there any other close to that scale, or is this by far the biggest?
Oh, this is by far the biggest in the foothill ceramics train. I'm guessing there's several others that might be 1/4 to half the size. We could go back. I've actually documented it, but it was so long ago. I mean, I've got the charts. I didn't pull them up because I have a whole list of all of the identified larger ones. Maybe 2 dozen, 3 dozen of them that are of substantial size. You can go, visit them, but none of them are this big. But let's take a look here at what just looking at this boulder here, Okotoks. Let's just see what looking at Okotoks can tell us. So describe to me what you see.
I see what appears to be a cut through, if that's one rock, it's either cut through one rock or divide between them. It's kind of flat.
Flat. Yep. Flat. That's good. And kind of, yeah. I mean,
there's a notch here on the left. I don't know if people can see my mouse, but in that left structure, right in the middle of it.
Yeah, well, that notch goes all the way through. So it's like a crack. More like a crack. So far, yeah. I mean, you're pointing out some good stuff there. Now look at also the like positions of the rock. What can you say about it? From looking at this, you think it would be a safe assumption to think that the surfaces of these rocks are more or less continuous? Like if, let's say you were looking at a battleship that got blown in two and it's sitting on the bottom of the ocean, right? And you're looking, and it's, you know, it's oblique sitting there on the ocean bottom, right? But you would look at that and you would go, well, obviously at some point, this was one structure, right? So if this was one structure, one rock, you basically have to come up first with a way of quarrying it from the Nunatak. Then you have to get that quarried 18,000-ton rock 300 miles and deliver it to this spot on the right where the prairie meets the foot of the mountains. And how do you do that?
I mean, from what we've looked at over the last couple of episodes, I would say that you need a lot of water. You probably need something to help dislodge it, some type of impact or something like that.
Yeah, you would need a force, right? You would need something to separate this, because at one time, obviously, this was part of the mountain. Right? So as I look at this, a couple of things that I would point out is that you look at the thickness of the rock here, that looks like it's a good 30 feet. You look at Brad, 6 feet tall. You know, is there 5 Brads? I would think if there's 5 of this guy's, at least 30 feet tall. Yeah. And you can see over here, it's not quite as high, but by the time you look at this back here, yeah, this looks like it's about as high as the prominence the Brad's standing in, almost. Now, here, you're obviously much closer to the ground. You're probably 15, 20 feet from the ground here, right? 15 feet, say. Now, does that mean that the bottom of this rock is flat and it's just thinner here? Or was it a rectilinear block of rock? And right here, this face of the rock would continue underground about this distance here. Same over here. You see what I'm saying here? Is that because that is in fact what the case is. Well, you can see right now, this block is not sinking into the ground, is it? But at one point, a big part of it sank into the ground. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that this was a soft surface, and this huge boulder sank. And as it sank, where did it separate? It separated what would have most likely just been natural fracture lines in the rock. Right? So we can reconstruct a scenario that this surface on the left would match this surface on the right. The thickness of this slab here is continuous. Let's just call it 30 feet. Same here. This block is a big portion of this block is underground. And now we have to think in terms of how this was delivered. It's likely I think we just could surmise that at the time this rock was deposited here, the ground was soft enough that like now it's not soft enough. This thing doesn't sink into the ground. You know, I mean, could you have enough of a right? Right. No, it's not. In fact, in the lifetime of the people living here, the Indians, it has not really, it hasn't sunk into the ground. But it did sink into the ground at some point. And what that tells you is that the ground was unconsolidated. It was probably fluidized, right? Which would be consistent with deposition from water flow, especially if the deposition of the strata, of the sediments on the bottom, was followed very quickly by deposition of the rock. Okay. So now, how do you get? Okay, so we can see that the rock it was not structurally sound because it's broken into three pieces, and those three pieces have most likely formed simply because of the effects of gravity on the rock once it was deposited onto this alluvial floodplain, which was still soft, right? So it was able to sink. But here's, now we could say, well, was it transported by glacier? What are the options for transport? Well, I think there's only, is there two or three? One, we could say glacier. Okay. But in normal glacier, how fast is the glacier moving? If the glacier is moving, 50 to 100 feet per year, which is going to be a typical rate of glacier placement. Let's just say 200 feet a year. If we've got 300 miles, well, even just from its position at the mountains to the Rocky Mountain front, let's say it's 30 miles. 30 miles, right? Well, so 30 miles is going to be 5,280 feet, and if we divide that by, say, 150 feet per year, well, that's going to take 1,000 years. Right? Right? I think unless I
think if it's
wait a minute. What did I say? You've got let's see, 30 miles times 5,280. So that's 158,400 feet. And if it moves 100 feet per year, I'll go 150 feet per year. Yeah, 1,056.
I mean, just about 1,000 years.
About 1,000 years. Okay. Now, in that 1,000 years, let's say you've got to extract something. You have to separate this rock from the mountain it was a part of. Right. And we assume that this happened. Are we fair to assume this happened when there was a big ice sheet and this was a nunatak? I mean, is that an assumption, or would this have been disconnected from the mountain, say, in its modern condition? Of course, the big problem there is there's no mechanism. If you were to dislodge an 18,000-ton boulder from one of the flanks of Mount Edith Cavell and it fell down into the valley, it's not going to end up 300 miles away out on the edge of the prairie, is it? No. In fact, it's probably going to bust into a million pieces on its way down. Exactly. So you can begin to see the problem. We're going to quarry a 18,000-ton boulder. We now have to transport it 300 miles, dump it onto the down edge of the prairie where the prairie meets the mountains. Right. Now.
And that's only if it moved 30 miles.
Yeah.
1,000 years, 30 miles, which would get us to the prairie.
Well, if it was ice. Glacier transport the entire way. Now we've got 300. Now you're looking at what, 15,000 years. Okay, now what's going to happen? Let's go back to the 30 and say 1,000 years. That means 1,000 years, 1,000 winters of snowfall, right? We can also assume what the snowfall is going to be greater than now. I mean, because after all, there was so much snowfall and so little melting away that you were able to fill those mountain valleys with thousands of feet of ice, of glacier, right? So how rapidly is that going to continue to accumulate? So in other words, how much glacial ice could accumulate in 1,000 years? So in other words, in 1,000 years, by the time, if that rock right there is placed on top of the ice sheet, and the ice sheet is moving and it's being transported, I mean, hell, we could double it. That doesn't matter. Say it's delivered in 500. It doesn't change the basic scenario. Is that during that time, it's going to get buried under 500 or 1,000 years of additional accumulation of glacial ice, right? So what's going to happen is that as that overlying ice begins to amass, it's putting pressure on anything that's within that ice mass. Could you, under those circumstances, if this thing right here is entrained within thousands of feet of glacial ice, under these extraordinary pressures, could it be delivered to this site intact? And the answer is, under what conceivable circumstances could this rock not be essentially more fractured, more pulverized under the enormous pressures of the overlying accumulating glacier mass that's going to occur, that's going to accrete over the thousands of years that it would take to move this rock from its source to where it is now, if you're looking at ordinary glacier accumulation, glacier movement, and so on. So we have to look at something else. And this is where we have to go, okay, it had to have been catastrophic. Now, at the very best, think about this. I want you to look at this picture here. And I want you to look at these edges. You see how these edges are very sharp, angular? See that? Okay, well, this would be completely contradicted by end glacial transport, which would grind off. There would be no sharp corners surviving entrainment within a glacier and then being carried hundreds of miles without and showing up at its destination with this kind of articulated, sharp, angular corners still intact.
So it's not like it was frozen in an ice cube and then slid all the way down here and then it melted.
Pretty much, yeah. But you have to think, you've got this glacier mass, and in this glacier mass, we've got this dynamic flow of ice, right? So now this rock is put on top of it, and as it slowly moves down, 100, 200, 300 feet per year, with some exceptions, because there will be some surge events within there. As it's moving down, it's continually snowing each year. So each year, it's accumulating another 3, 4, 5, 6 feet of snow. Then the next year, then it's buried. Then as that continues to accumulate, those layers of snow that came down immediately subsequent to that rock being placed on that glacier, it's going to get buried under first hundreds, then thousands of feet of additional accumulated glacial ice. So that is the problem. When we see boulders that we know have been entrained and carried within glaciers, they don't come out with this kind of pristine, angular corners. They're ground. You know, think of if you throw a rock in a rock tumble. Right? Well, with the glacier, it's like a slow motion rock tumble, but the end result is that it's going to shear off corners, sharp corners, that sort of thing. You don't see that. That's what I'm trying to call your attention to. So you have to have a method of transport that's not going to have that grinding effect on the bone. It has to be transported more or less pristine. In other words, these fracture lines here are only slightly younger than the fracture line that separated, let's say, this space here from the original mountain. And there's been very little erosion of it, right? It was carried this far, 300 miles, set down in this floor of unconsolidated alluvium. It came in with its angles intact. How do you do that? Well, several things happen to be simultaneous. The only way you're going to get this rock here, carry, you can't bring it in the water itself. right? Because if the water is turbulent and forceful enough that it's transporting, that this 18,000-ton rock could be transported within the flow, well, it's going to get busted up long before it gets here. It's going to get busted up in the first 10, 20, 30 miles of transport. Boom, that rock, by the time it got to here, it's gravel. See, you're not going to have this, not in water transport. So we can exclude that. We can exclude and glacial or within the glacial transport because it wouldn't necessarily turn it into gravel, but it would definitely grind it up and it would start with any sharp corners, any angularities, any fresh exposed rock is going to be the first that succumbs to the slow motion tumbling and rolling of the block within the glacier mass. So what does that leave? Well, it couldn't be transported. I think we can exclude transport within the glacier. It's certainly not going to be under the glacier. That's not going to survive. It had to be on top of the glacier, right? But that glacier has to be in water. It has to be an ice.
Okay, yeah. So it's on top of the glacier, or it's an iceberg essentially moving through. I mean, I would guess rapidly moving water.
Yes, that's loaded with sediment.
And it's dropping these rocks along the way.
Well, what you picture is a very large flood, choked with sediment, choked with icebergs, and on many of these icebergs are the remains of this Mount Edith Cavell. Rocks that had been quarried from the mountain, which we assume at the time was a nunatak. So if you know, and of course, all of these assumptions you can go into much more specific, and you know, when you begin to really look at each one, each one seems to have evidence in its favor. What we're describing here is somewhat speculative, but it's consistent with what we know about the whole process. But there are big blanks, like by what process are the original rocks excised or disconnected from the original mountains, placed onto the ice. And what it looks like is you have a scenario that would require almost instantaneously the emplacement of the boulders onto the ice, the fracturing of the ice, and the melting of the ice. The melting of the ice provides the flow that then transported the icebergs, which were the fractured pieces of the ice that were, so you had part of the ice sheet basically smashed into icebergs. Presumably the same force smashes the Rocky Mountain peaks that are now shoveled or avalanche out onto the ice sheet itself. The ice sheet is undergoing massive melting. And so now the broken pieces that have the massive boulders avalanched onto them are now being swept down into the meltwater flow. It discharges from the Rocky Mountain front. Topography directs it to the south, and most likely what happened was when you, on the other side of this corridor through which these erratics are strewn, stood the Laurentide ice sheet. So the water couldn't just flow to the east because the front of the Laurentide, the Great Laurentide ice sheet, stood in its way, which would have deflected the flow to the south. So interestingly, the foothills erratics trend defines the same thing that is known as the ice-free corridor, which was assumed to have been a passageway for the migration of both people and animals. And this probably would have happened pre-Younger Dryas.
So to the east of the ice-free corridor, is there more glacial structures? Are there more glaciers?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's moraines, huge moraine deposits that were created by the Laurentide ice sheet. And we can see some of the rocks that are in that have been transported hundreds and hundreds of miles from further east, carried by the glaciers, and it dumped as terminal moraines immediately to the east of the erratic spur. So you had these two great ice sheets, and they met. The Laurentide, the bigger of the two, centered over Hudson Bay, reaching all the way to the foot of the rock. You can see, and in fact, in the late glacial maximum, there was no ice sheet. The Laurentide and the Cordilleran ice sheets, they met and flowed together. This did not happen apparently then. But again, it says this is about 14,000, and 15,000, and we saw 14.9, and I was suggesting 14.6. But that remains to be seen, because if it's 14.6, then it puts this exactly consistent with Meltwater Pulse 1A. So let's kind of put together what we've got here. We have to contrive a scenario that will fracture huge amounts of bedrock, let's say Mount Cavell, avalanche this stuff out onto the glacier surface. Then the glacier has to be broken, because the only way you're going to transport these boulders from their source is through iceberg transport, just like we know it's happened, and we've looked at and documented, and we've seen the evidence for that mode of transport in the Scablands, right? Yeah. We saw boulders there that were transported by icebergs. And we saw we learned about berg mounds. Remember berg mounds? Right. Because let's say you've got a big dirty iceberg, but you don't have a boulder sitting on it. But then that dirty iceberg comes to ground. It melts. And all of that dirt, debris, and gravel and everything that's in it will make a pile. And you can trace these piles once you know the genesis of these piles over the landscape, that they're berg mounds. That's one of the proxies we use for, at least up in the glaciated terrains, to identify flow pathways. You know, okay, if you see a field full of berg mounds, you know, okay, there was a current flow that swept over this. There were icebergs in it. Those icebergs came to ground. So what we've been able to deduce now from all of this, what we've looked at, okay, we're looking at water transport, and that is confirmed by the fact that the valley floor the valley floor is consistent with having been unconsolidated alluvium, which you've got the water flow is going to be choked with sediment within. It's not clean water at all. It's dirty water. And when that flood water subsides, it leaves behind essentially a big, thick layer of bark. So now, here's what you can picture. You have to come up with a source, a force, an energy that can virtually simultaneously fracture the flanks of the mountains extending above the glaciers in the form of nunatons, fracture those, avalanche them out onto the ice. At the same time, huge volumes of that ice are being melted, and then there's enough of a current that current is taking these chunks of ice and washing them out, washing them through the Athabasca Valley, discharging at the Rocky Mountain front, washing up against the wall, the Laurentide ice sheet, and being deflected to the south. So all of this stuff is surging out. Let's go back to the mountain. I mean, to the map. So I'll stop, and then I'll reshare. I'm getting really good at this.
Yeah. Well, you might want to keep going on this point, but I have a question about. I mean, what did they find underneath the rock? Has anybody looked under?
No, I don't think anybody's excavated under it. I mean, actually dug.
Any scans?
Yeah, there've been some stuff. That's why I can say that this is like a big part of this rock is actually buried underground. Okay, we're now back here. Let's go to Mount. Let's see, Mount Edith Cavell. Okay, let's say that we go in here and we look, and we see several. Let's focus in. I hope the focus is better than this. But we can see several places that look like they could be good candidates. Like, look at this. This has been scooped out here by glaciers. Let's see if we get some pictures of Mount Edith Cavell. There we go. So those rocks came from somewhere, were part of this mountain, and they would have been from up near the top, because the assumption is that at the time they were quarried, most of these valleys were completely filled with ice. So be interesting, and I haven't done this, but I would guess you could go maybe using OSL, looking at just the geomorphology and actually finding the spot where these, if you were to reverse, if you were to play this film backwards 15,000 years and then see this stuff going back up and then becoming part of the mountain, where exactly was it? I don't know. But you can actually see, and I have looked at Google Earth. Maybe you could pull that up in a minute. Let's see if I close this out. Maybe is it going to focus for us? Well, there's plenty of candidate locations of where this sculpting could have taken place. But you have to transport it through this valley here, and look at the floor of the valley. You see these long linear trends? And look up here, you can see, here very clearly the results of this catastrophic flow through this valley. You can see it very clearly right through here. So you had water flows coming down. Let's see, there's Mount Robson right here. Oh yeah, now we're getting it. Now we're starting to get some resolution. So it could have been anywhere along this, probably along this southwestern flank. That if Robson was the source, this southwestern flank looks like it would have been the most likely location. Like, look at this right here. This could have been quarried out right here. Google Earth could probably tell us something. But in any case, either way, you can see that rivers converge right here, and then flows up to the north. And, you look, you see the flat floor here, that's all sediment. Left. Comes out this way, and we should be able to actually find the channels. Probably, let's see, through here, because I don't know exactly where the Laurentide front was, but it was somewhere out in here. And that's why the water couldn't keep flowing east. It had to get turned to the south. And then Okotoks got dumped here. So there would have been a very large iceberg necessary to transport Okotoks. So the size of that iceberg might give one an idea of the magnitude of this flow that's coming through, because that iceberg is probably the size of the tank that's carrying this as its cargo. Now you got to picture that the final stages of that process is if the iceberg is being swept along in the flow, and because it's the biggest iceberg, it probably was one of the first ones to come to ground. But so the iceberg comes to ground literally, right? It stalls at some point, because as the floodwaters are declining, it's losing its competency to transport mass. So the first thing that settles out is going to be the heaviest and biggest stuff. So the iceberg comes to ground. It's in a bed of soft material, but then the iceberg itself has to melt away. Now it might take years for that iceberg to melt away, but bear in mind that iceberg melting away is also going to keep the substrate, the ground underneath, perpetually wet and soft until the iceberg is gone, and then the modern climate can come in and all of that. But so the final stage of this process is actually rather slow and gentle, because the force to create this flood and the armada of undoubtedly hundreds or probably thousands of icebergs being carried along, the water flow had to be enormous. There had to be a lot of icebergs, because each iceberg, every iceberg is going to be carrying a rock. So you probably got, for every rock, you probably got 10 or 20 or more icebergs being carried along in it. but there's enough rocks to show that there had to be more than just melting of the glacier, because you have to impose enough force that you're going to fracture the flanks of the mountains, the shoulders of the mountains protruding above the ice sheet. So how do you do that? I don't know. Other than I can spec this, and I would spec this some type of an impact event, whether an atmospheric explosion or actual impacts. But where would you look for actual impacts? I don't know. Other than if we go north of here, you'll notice you've got this long trough, and you can see that the valleys are all interconnected. See this? Look at this. Okay, but then you trace this channel north all the way up to here, and you get up to Prince George. And all of this area up in here, let's see, where's Prince George? Let's zoom out. There it is, Prince George right there. And there's something interesting going on when you start looking at the landscape around Prince George. And here you can see what we're getting into. You see what we're looking at here?
Yeah. Chevrons.
Drumlins. Thousands and thousands of drumlins. We've looked at drumlins, haven't we?
I think we've actually looked at Prince George very briefly before.
Now, drumlins are a paleocurrent indicator. They can tell us which way the water is flowing. The blunt end faces of a drumlin, the blunt end faces up current, faces upstream. So if you're looking at this, what was the direction of flow that sculpted these drumlins?
The blunt end faces upstream.
Yes. Blunt end faces the direction that the current is coming from.
Yeah. Well, they're coming
Yo,
south.
Irie Butler, what's up, man? Golden Irie, what's up,
Do
man?
you see a blunt end? When I say
Good to
blunt
see you, my
end,
friend.
look at this right here. This is
I
blunt.
guess
See this? This is the blunt end. And then you have
on
taper.
YouTube
Look at these. These are
have
clear.
hours
See,
of
south,
China
south,
megalith
blunt,
videos.
And they taper as you go
For your
forward. So
interest.
this is telling you which
I
direction.
hope you're doing well, my friend.
Now these are subglacial flows we're talking about. This is a movement, massive subglacial water movement has created this landscape that you're looking at. And which way is this flow going? It's going south-southwest to north-northeast. And it's coming right up here, headed like it's going straight for Prince George. And you see that over here, the top edge of the Rocky Mountain Range, and goes all the way down, all the way down, all the way down, all the way down to Flathead Lake. And then it opens into the basin, the Mission Basin it's called, because these are the Mission Mountains. And at the south end of Flathead Lake, you've got this hummocky stuff, which is terminal mooring. And I think we've defined terminal mooring, haven't we?
I believe so. I know we've defined moraine.
Right. There's more rain, and then there's less rain. And if you have no rain at all, it's known as a drought. Okay? Good. I'm glad you're straight on.
Thank you. What is terminal moraine?
Well, look it up. Terminal moraine. So, first of all, let's define moraine. Moraine is the ground mass that's created by the glacier grinding over and pulverizing the landscape. The terminus of the glacier is where the snout of the glacier, where the glacier ends, right? That's also called the zone of ablation. It's where the tip end of the glacial tongue tends to melt back as fast as it's growing, right? The moraine that piles up at the glacial terminus is called terminal moraine. So right here you have terminal moraine. And what this terminal moraine that you see right here does is it tells you that this was the southernmost extension of this lobe of ice. Here's the moraine right here. And you can go through it. I've been through this many times. And,
Yeah, man, I have many more hours still to upload. So I guess I just rebranded a bit to align with that. I mean, it's my passion too. I like something I'm passionate about. So let's see how it goes.
There's no structure to it. There's no architecture. There seems to be no stratification to it. And that is how you distinguish a deposition from a glacier, because it's a structural mass, structureless mass from the deposition of water that would usually have some kind of architecture within it, showing bedding and sorting of the constituents of the deposit, right? So structure, architecture, and water flow, chaos, no structure in glacier. So moraine, but see, here's where drumlins get interesting, because drumlins start out as incoherent, chaotic, jumbled, pulverized glacier, subglacial mass. But then you look at a drumlin field, and there's structure to it. Like, just compare what we just saw with drumlin swarms compared to this. Well, there's some structure here, right? You can kind of almost see that there's kind of a recessional effect going on. So you've got this mass here in probably a short passage of time, because this glacier is now melting, right? After the catastrophic disruption, which completely causes the conversion of large amounts of glacier into, first of all, water, and then, of course, solid chunks of ice. But then, after a period of time, the point I guess I'm trying to make here is that we could estimate maybe a quarter, maybe a third of the I don't think as much as a half of the glaciers are destroyed in these convulsive events. Because what happens is, it seems like the convulsive event separates two glacier regimes. One is that prior to that, the glaciers are living glaciers. You have a zone of accumulation. You have a zone of ablation. In the highlands, the glaciers are accumulating. Each year's mass of snow adds to the growth of the glacier. The weight of that pushes on the glacier, causes a dynamic flow downhill, all the way down to the snout of the glacier, where most of the melting takes place. In between the zone of accumulation and the zone of ablation, there's this inflection point, the equilibrium point, where accumulation, where the transition occurs from the glacier growing to the glacier shrinking. Right, that's called the equilibrium line. So in colder times, the equilibrium line goes up. In warmer times, the equilibrium line comes down. Okay, so if it comes down, it's going to be more readily melt. But in either case, you see what you've got right here is terminal moraine. We can zoom out. We can go, let's go up here. We can see, here's another example of terminal moraine. So what happened was you had this major glacier lobe coming down, and it trifurcated into three sublobes. One of them got diverted right back to the northwest. One of them got diverted to the west, and another one got diverted to the south. The one that diverted to the south left its calling card in the form of this moraine, called the Polson moraine. This lobe terminated right here. You can see, look, here you've got the flat, outwashed plain that was in front of the glacier snout, and here's where the glacier snout is. So all of this right here is lateral moraine, because it was on the side of the glacier. then this is the terminal right here. And there was a natural breach of meltwater through that terminal moraine, which provided the most convenient and economically feasible place to route State Route 28. So here's an example of, humans coming by thousands of years later and taking advantage of the features in the landscape that were created by these natural events. But interestingly, there was another major flow. We looked at this, came down right through this one, and just like when, it was the glacier lobe was here. So when this water came down and hit the glacier lobe, it was diverted to the west, and you can trace its path right down this way, and it flowed out. So if you were looking at this over at the time this flood happened, this would have been an Nunatak right here. Right? All of this was buried under ice. And now you've got this major subglacial flow coming from the north here.
So why did it divert to the northwest? Why did one of the lobes divert to the northwest?
Well, I would imagine that, if you look at this is a smaller lobe than this lobe. And that's a smaller lobe than this lobe.
I see.
Right. And it was probably just because, if you can see here, the mountains are bottlenecked. So that means that the ice would have been piling up. Right? It's being fed from, the ice is continuing to flow south. The big main trunk has got this big glacier flowing south, right? Well, when this diverts to the west, what's happening, it's trying to go into this V-shaped valley. You can see how the valley is getting narrow. So that causes the ice to pile up. And when it does, the path of least resistance probably was this to the north. However, when that lobe did divert to the northwest, it left its own hand, sculpting of the landscape. And I mean, you can see where the glaciers ground their way around this way. Then you can come up here, and here's terminal moraine right up here. Right? And then you had this huge flow that came down, and prior to that flow, this ridge would have been all connected. So this island wouldn't have been an island, it would have been a continuous ridge going right up here. This right here now is a 500-foot cliff. This trough, you can see this was a spillway right here. And right here, where there's a lake that occupies the bottom of this trough, the spillway trough, because as the water rounded this curve, it was particularly turbulent. And because it was turbulent, it was able to ground to a road up the bottom of the channel quickly, you see. So you've got a scour trough right here. Here's another one right up here. So this was a water pathway. So you can chart all this, and this is where Google Maps and Google Earth and all comes in so handy. Because, a few generations ago, we didn't have these tools. So all of this is just this clogging of sediment that occurred between the mountain ridge here and the thick glacier lobe here. So you had this trough between them. So that became a conduit, and it flowed down. And the whole floor of this valley here has all of the sculpting of the sides show the turbulent vorticular motion of the water as it's moving through. It was choked with sediment because when the floodwaters finally subsided, it left this flat area here. And if you were to dig down, if you were to flush all of this out, you would have seen that pre-flood it was a V-shaped valley floor. And if you fill this up, I don't know, 200 to 300 feet, probably 200 to 300 feet at least of flat sedimentary floor. This is called Big Draw. And on our Montana tours, we follow this route because we follow the route of the floodwater.
And so then it filled up 200-300 feet of sediment, making it flat.
Yes. Yep. And then, look, the water gets diverted to the south right here and flows down through the Little Bitterroot Valley.
And it's diverted because is there a glacier there, or is there some type
yes,
of...
The glaciers would have been probably, right in here. I don't know exactly where they were because part of the problem is, and I haven't been up, this could be remnants of moraine here. I haven't been up here. I've been down 28 many times, but I've never gotten out and explored intimately this area up here. But it's likely that, you know, if you picture this is buried in glaciers here, that glacier line is going to come across right here. So yeah, you're going to have these mountain glaciers that are part of the Cordilleran ice sheet. This is probably where they stop. Right? It would make sense because right here, the glacier lobe is usually going to project further south than just the normal edge of the ice. You'll have the normal edge of the ice sheet, and then in places where the topography is conducive, you will have these tongues flowing off. Right? And so those create those glacier lobes. So it's most likely what you're going to have is the glaciers are covering these mountains. But there would have been enough open area in the valley that this water came down, rushing down, and then it hit these hills right here. And you can see that there are several places where the water breached the hills. Right here you see some Scourcroft Lakes. Right here, Schmidt's Lake. Where else? There would have been a flow that came down this way as well. And if I go to satellite view, and I zoom in, we looked at this. Remember this? There's your giant current rivers. And you can actually see there's multiple streams, multiple mega flows coming through here. So look at this. Here's a mega flow coming through here. Right? Here is a mega flow. You can see it, look, two flows right here. Here's one, they're almost conjoined right here at the hip. And then they separate down here. The peak here of the depth of this water through this Camas Prairie here was, we can know because we know the elevation above sea level of the basin floor, and we can trace the high water up on the valley walls, and on the valley, on the mountain walls, the high water mark is at 4,200 feet above sea level, 4,200. So the valley floor is 2,800 feet above sea level. So from that, we can determine that it was the water at its maximum depth coming through was 1,400 feet, 1,400 feet. And it's 5 miles wide there, and it's probably moving at 40 to 50 miles an hour. And it would have been choked again with icebergs. But see this. So now we've kind of raised an interesting question. I've kind of showed you this connection now between the Rocky Mountain Trench, which at its south end is feeding into Lake Missoula.
Thank you for watching. You're amazing. Can't wait to see you later. You're amazing.
On this interesting terrain up here that's characterized by these massive drumlin swarms. Now, could all of this be related to what's going on over here with the foothill sporadic stream? I would say it's almost 100% certain. Now, if not, yes. But you see, here's the thing. Here's again, Main Street. Doesn't, just like in the same way, Bonneville flood and Missoula flood are two separate, unrelated events. Well, here's another. This event, if we want to call it the Calgary flood, or the Athabasca flood, I call it the Athabasca flood because of the Athabasca River. Well, is that also unrelated? But if it's related to the Missoula flood, and the Bonneville is in some way related to the Missoula flood, then they're all related to each other, aren't they?
I would think so.
One would think so. Let's go back to my other study.
This might be jumping ahead here, but are we looking at Prince George as a potential point where that catalyzed this?
Well, I think that, yeah, and in fact, that's exactly where I'm going with this. Okay, so let's just continue on with the slideshow. Next slide. See the yellow line? That represents the Alberta-Montana state line. You see what we're looking at here?
It looks like
Ripple. Giant ripple. And you see this white line here? That's a mile long. So these are massive. Well, if you go back and you follow the erratic strain to where it passes into Montana, this is what you see. So this is further, this to me is confirmation, and yeah, we're talking about really large waterfalls.
This is further west.
Further east. Further east, yes. In fact, it's the Milk River that flows through here. So let's go back up where you can see where Calgary is. So the train comes right down this way, comes over, and you can actually start seeing there's a pathway right in here by Milk River. And if we zoom in, let's see if I can catch this on the first attempt. Let's see, if we zoom in, let's see. We should be able to see him. They're right in here. Where is it? They're right in here. You can see the giant ripple train. Milk River. Okay, maybe it's over here. Yeah, there it is. There it is. So that water flowed down this way and passed over from Alberta into what is upper Montana. You can see where several places it starts down cutting channels. And if I go back to here, let's see here, River, we should be able, there, look, so this should be recognizable to you now. Underfit River, right?
Yeah.
A modern, so this is the Missouri River. So, in other words, this flood that came from these melting, huge ice sheets over the Continental Divide, washed down along the east of the Rocky Mountain front, loaded and choked with gigantic icebergs that were loaded with huge boulders of metaquartzite that came most likely from the flanks of Mount Cavell, strewn for a line of 500 miles along the corridor between the Cordilleran ice sheet and the Laurentide ice sheet, at the end of where we see that right there where the erratic strain stops is pretty much where we start seeing the giant pressure. And then that goes in and begins to carve down the valley that is now occupied by the Missouri River. So ultimately, where was all this water headed? It was headed to the Gulf of Mexico. So if you were in a raft sitting up on sitting on the glacier next to Mount Edith Cavell, and somehow you survive, the end of your journey would be the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, I'd take that journey. I'd do it for the weather.
Yeah, well, maybe I'd take it like the second, not the first. But so you're beginning to get the picture here, I hope. Is that okay? So now Missouri River, right? When you think of the Missouri River, you're not necessarily immediately, the first thing that pops into your mind is not any of what we've just looked at here. Gigantic catastrophic floods sweeping over the land, probably hundreds of feet deep, carrying gigantic icebergs by the hundreds or probably thousands, right? You're not picturing any of that, but that essentially is realistically the scenario that created what we now see as the end result. The Missouri River Valley, the giant ripples, the alluvial floor, the giant boulders that hadn't been transported by icebergs, etc. So that's what we're trying to get at here, why we're calling this the big picture.
Yeah.
And you see how we just now outlined a whole nother piece of this puzzle that we've now put into this emerging storyline or scenario, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, last time we talked about this, last episode, we talked about this. It was so much information, and I was kind of foggy on where we're going with this because we had talked about Prince George a long time ago. We had talked about Bonneville, but this is, I would say I'm guessing the picture expands farther beyond this, but this has painted a much more clear picture where at least we have an idea of what could be the catalyst of it before we were looking at what the consequences were of something that we weren't quite sure where it was coming from or what it was.
Well, let's do a little bit more forensic geological thinking. Okay, so here we have back to the Drumlin song. Are we still sharing screen here? Okay. Remember I said that the blunt end focus is facing upstream. So imagine if you've got a bridge here and that water is flowing down and hits the bridge here and it cuts around it, right? In a sense, it's like that. So this is a water that's flowing from down here going this way. Well, where's it coming from? If I zoom out, where's it coming from? Where was the source of this water? Now, this was a lot of water that created this Drumlin swarm here. So, either there was ice there or there wasn't ice. Now, the theory is that Drumlins are formed by massive subglacial flows. So once again, now what we have to assume is if that's correct, then there was ice here, a lot of thousands of feet thick, but at some point there was this huge onrush of water headed essentially towards Prince George, but where's it coming from? And then we've got this long linear feature here, and we've just seen what happened in here, right? Now, is this creation of the Drumlin swarm connected with the creation of the foothills erratic trend?
I would think so.
Well, how do we tie them together generically? Well, if there's water coming from the southwest, where's it ultimately coming from?
The ocean.
Well, it would have to be salt water. I don't think there's any evidence of marine.
So there must be some type of water.
Well, remember, there was a whole lot of glacier over here. Probably, a couple of thousand cubic miles of ice minimum over this plateau region. Probably way more than that. Probably 10,000 by the time I figured it all out. Well,
10,000 feet of ice right there.
I don't think it would have been 10,000. Probably more like 5,000. Probably a mile thick on top. Because sometimes up on the high uplands like this, the ice is not as thick as it actually is in the valleys. So for a while, this Drumlin orientation confused me. Because my research led me to think that Prince George was an epicenter. Because for one thing, like look over here, you can see the direction of flow in all these cases. Look at these scour trough lakes. Now, if they're not exclusively sculpted by glaciers, there would have been water as well. And if you look here, you'll see immediately to the west, your orientation is east-west. As you go to the northwest, the orientation is northwest-southeast. Right. Of course, here we have the mountain blockading. So you've got this long trough here that goes right on up. It's almost like it's a continuation of the Rocky Mountain Trench. You see that? But the eastern flank of the Rocky Mountain Trench here has been obscured. Why? Well, that's speculation. There's a lot to still be teased out of all of this. But in either case, we have this very large subglacial water flow here, flowing towards Prince George. Well, that would seem to contradict the idea that Prince George is an epicenter, wouldn't it? Unless that was not the original flow direction. Now, in order to try to make sense out of this, I took a look at ocean impact. So what happens in an ocean impact? Well, and this in our laboratory confirmation this. If you fire a projectile into the water, it penetrates the water. It creates an outward expansion of the water. It leaves a void, a transient crater, it's called. If the object is big enough and has enough force, the transient crater will go all the way to the bottom of the water column. Now, if that's an ocean that's a mile deep, it might take an asteroid, maybe 1/4 of that in diameter, to penetrate a full mile of ocean and actually hit the bottom of the ocean, right? And leave it crater. Right? Except this is going to be very different than an impact of the same sized object on land. Why? Well, you got the water.
Thanks, man.
So
I did a weightlifting stream yesterday, which is why I did fewer sets today. But thanks, man. I'm gonna sign off though. Thank you for being here, everyone. Appreciate it.
That only lasts for, maybe minutes. Depends on the size of the projector and how much water is displaced by the passage of that object through the water column. Well, it's going to rush outwards, isn't it? But is it going to keep rushing outwards indefinitely? No. What's it going to do? At some point, it's going to stop, reverse directions, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's going to flow back in.
Friends, thank you, man. Thank you, brother.
I think that's what we're looking at here. There's even a term. It's called the resurge wave. So after the hypothetical, and we know from the very limited discoveries of craters on ocean bottoms, that one of the things that will happen is the resurge wave. Like if the same crater was on land, there might be a prominent, very easy to distinguish rim around the crater. But with the resurge wave, it can wash away a lot of the upraised rim. Makes sense, doesn't it? Because this onrush of the water back into the cavity is going to be pretty darn forceful and turbulent, isn't it? It might leave vestiges of the ring that could be identified, but just like we saw with the elbow boring there was a breach. Remember, there was a breach. 28 went through that breach, right? Well, in the case of a research wave, it would create multiple breaches on the crater rim, but it might actually leave enough of the crater rim that you could reconstruct it. But in any case, it's going to largely make it much more difficult to identify the crater rim. The other thing that it's going to do is it's going to wash a lot of sediment back into the crater. So not only is the water going to lower the rim and obscure the rim, it's also going to dump material into the crater form that fills it up. So now the crater isn't nearly as prominent as it would be had the same event occurred on land. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So what I would speculate here is that we have some force that was able to drive this water under the ice, subglacial, and it was only able to travel